It's the Fitness Lab Pittsburgh podcast, a new episode every week. A podcast about movement, part of making your life complete. Fitness Lab Pittsburgh, aka FitLabPGH, brings you interviews with people in the Pittsburgh area who understand movement is part of what makes life complete. Looking for a new movement idea or just want to hear interesting stories about people who make movement a priority? This is the podcast for you. Whether you consider the gym, dojo, or fitness studio your third place, or just want to learn more about movement, activity, and fitness to enhance your life, give FitLabPGH a listen. We interview locals in the Pittsburgh area who make Pittsburgh a great place to move. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Subscribing is free and gives you notifications when we release new episodes. Each podcast episode will be long enough to pique your interest and short enough to hold your attention. Have an idea for an episode? Know somebody we should interview? Or just want to connect with us? Drop us an email, fitlabpgh@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at FITLABPGH. Already a fan of FitLabPGH? Check out our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast for movement professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers weekly interviews with movement professionals featuring topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you enjoy our next interview, starting now. Welcome back to another podcast episode. I'm the host, Ben Reuter. This is a dual podcast episode for Moving to Live and FitLab Pittsburgh, both of which have the ethos movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. FitLabPGH interviews people around the Pittsburgh area who make movement a priority, whether they're movers, people who are in the profession of making people move, or just have an interesting story about moving. Moving to Live tries to interview movement professionals to find out their story and also to find out how they do their jobs in the era of COVID-19. The coronavirus. This has thrown everybody in the movement field really for a loop. And as most of my good ideas occur, this occurred while I was out running with my dogs. I was practicing social distancing, and I realized that with the upheaval in the fitness world of what do you do if you don't go to a gym or a facility or you don't have organized practices, I had interviewed a few people for my podcasts who were able to speak on this directly because they see people both virtually and in person. I am happy to announce that today I am joined by Mike Schultz of Highland Training. We interviewed Mike for both FitLab Pittsburgh and Moving to Live back in October of 2019. And I think Mike is going to have some interesting insights since he's been coaching and teaching people virtually probably since the age of dial-up internet for some people. So Mike, thanks for taking time to talk to me on the podcast today.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. I always enjoy being on the podcast and speaking about this stuff. When I did start, I had dial-up internet, and that was, 2008, 2007, in that range, just when the iPhone was becoming popular and getting big. And so, that's when it all kind of took off online.
And of course, I'd always want everybody to go back and listen to my podcast episode with you because I think you had some great info talking about your background. But just to remind listeners or maybe people who haven't gone back, what is it exactly that you do with Highland Training?
Well, I am and a small team of people that I co-work with. We focus on athletic performance, and that was the main goal. And, way back in the day when I was trying to figure out how I was going to do this, one of the ways to train, especially runners and cyclists, we mainly focus on cyclists. And one of the best ways to do it is via online. And so, you need a schedule and you need goals. And then, like I just mentioned, the invention of the iPhone and then Garmin becoming big. And all of a sudden, now you can go run or ride your bike anywhere in the world and upload the files to the computer to look at. And then Strava came along, and all these online tools then kind of like hone their practice and all become very cool. And they all work in slightly different ways. But, you start to say, okay, well, as a coach, I can view a workout of someone in California, and I can see how far they ran. I can see how intense. I can get their notes. I can call them on the phone. We can talk about it. And this makes better sense working together than actually showing up in person every day. So in a nutshell, that's what we do week by week is communicate with all the athletes that we got, write schedules week by week, and with the goal to gain strength, mainly on the bike.
And I know from talking to you, I guess 5 or 6 months ago in October, you work with athletes, not just elite level athletes, but just somebody who has maybe the goal of, I'd like to do a century or I'd like to do a Grand Fondo. So really across the spectrum from high level to people who say, I just like to move.
That's totally correct. And yes, I got people who may focus on, I try to get everyone to focus on at least one event or something to do every year. Just as gives you a goal to work towards, outside of the general fitness aspect. But sure, I bring on people. I have a guy who just got into cycling like in the past year and, was a weightlifter back in the day, I think did some trail running and took some time off and kids and all. And so he just got back into cycling and this is all brand new to him. And so it's pretty cool. I mean, so I get to apply, and honestly, from the beginners to the elites, I mean, they're all kind of focused on the same thing at times. It's just, it's how much duration they can put in each week or how much power they're putting out or how intense the workout is. So there are slight differences, but yes, I get to see it across the board. And there's commons amongst it all and ways to gain strength and stuff.
So I guess it would be correct to say on the one hand, with your coaching in the coronavirus, your coaching really hasn't changed that much. But on the other hand, I suspect it has, partially because of the cancellation of so many races and events, and partially just with having athletes and people that you coach literally across the U.S., what's happening and what the concerns are, it differs from area to area. So when was the first time with your coaching business that you first became aware it's like, hey, this might be something that's going to have a direct influence on either me or the athletes that I'm coaching?
Probably a few weeks ago. And, I've been following the news every day, and obviously I work online. So I'm online. I can pull up the news and see what's going on. And, as everyone knows, it's been changing rapidly. I think about, when they started shutting the schools down here in PA and went to essential businesses, and I began to send messages to everyone of, hey, here's some general rules, what I'm going for. The first number one rule is like, don't go out and waste yourself on a ride. Don't lower your immune system and become susceptible to something like this. And so the races are put off right now. So well, first of all, that was kind of like a reality that hit everyone kind of slowly as races started to get canceled. And on my side, I just kind of had to sit back and wait and say, all right, what's going to happen here? Let's give it 5 days. And then we kind of seen everything canceled, obviously February, March, or March and April. May, most things are starting to cancel. June, the races are kind of holding out to see what's going on. So at that point, we just kind of take a step back and say, all right, there's no more racing. Let's get over the fact that no one's going to be racing now. And let's focus on some base building, building the engine again. And then we'll ramp up and kind of wait week by time to see what's going to happen, how it's going to play out.
And I would imagine, not to put a positive spin on COVID-19, but for some people, potentially not racing and having more time to build a base and build strength could potentially long-term over the years make them better riders, if I'm not incorrect.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's sad to see what's happening with the Olympics, for example, on that end. Obviously, that's the most elite end. Because those guys are really, they're trying to peak for something that's months away, and now it's canceled. But for the majority of us, especially across the U.S. here, focused on bike races and health and getting stronger and being competitive in age groups. I think it's, it's kind of I hate to say put a positive spin on it, but it's kind of a blessing in a way, because everyone just now gets to take a break from doing events and focusing on these things. And everyone's got to just chill out and either ride their bike or run alone. And so it's kind of put a different spin on everything. But as with everyone's got a personal life. And, I think it took a week or a week and a half figuring out jobs and kids and all this kind of stuff. So there was a little disruption there. And we're actually now just people are just getting into the groove of, all right, I'm staying at home, I'm working out every day, and back into the swing of things.
And I think it's great that you mentioned that there's a life outside of sports and outside of cycling for most of us if we're not making our living at it. And I'm curious what the messages are that you're giving to your athletes, because I know if you read on Facebook or Twitter, there are some amateur athletes who maybe are going off the deep end because their Ironman race has been canceled or postponed, or they can't run that spring marathon. And we're not talking about somebody who, is going to the Olympics and this is a once in a lifetime. We're talking about somebody, and this isn't to downplay it, because when I participate, this is what I get. You're getting a participation medal for completing that 100-mile race or whatever it is. What's the message you give to these people who are kind of almost ready to jump off the deep end because they can't do that activity that for some of them, at least I know in the case of Ironman triathlon, you maybe have been training for it and looking for it for almost a year or even over a year?
Yeah, and that's big. I fortunately didn't have anyone on my roster shooting for something super big. Like, Ironmans are pretty big. You can train for a long time for them. And that's the letdown, the emotional, as there's an emotional part of exercise and competing and all this stuff. And there are letdowns and they suck. But I've had a few, I have a few guys that are traveling overseas, for example, and it's, they're going to do a bike tour. It's not even a race, and it's on the bubble. And, they're not bummed yet, but my message to them is, like, it's out of your control. I mean, it is what it is. And it's life. I mean, like, no one ever expected this to happen. So let's look at the positives. We're working out every day. We had this goal, right? And so right now, just put it out of your mind. Like, we'll know more in a month or so. To the people who are missing those big events, you have to kind of take you have to coddle those guys and women, because it's an emotional drain. I saw one guy, he traveled overseas and then the event got canceled. There's a lot of big events that got canceled. Cape Epic over in Africa, that was the big one that got canceled. And I think I saw online they're making the best of it and riding their bikes over there and stuff and then getting back. But to some extent, you can't really control it. So,
I know you and I have talked the first time we chatted in the podcast just about how much fun and how enjoyable it is to be outside in the fresh air and the things that you can see on the bike or on the run. Is this a message that you think some people, because we all know, and I'll just pick on bike racers, that sometimes they're just so focused, they have to get that exact power measure. If they're going off heart rate, it has to be that. If they're doing hill repeats, if they're 3 seconds slow on a 10-minute climb, they're almost distraught. Is there a message you're sending to some of these athletes who maybe are missing out at events? It's like, hey, think about why you got into cycling in the first place. Think about the enjoyment of actually going out and getting a workout without saying, I have to hit my heart rate goals or my power goals or the time or the speed goals.
Well, that's something that I try to teach everyone all the time, outside of this COVID-19 stuff, because there's stressful times. Like you said, everyone has a job, a life, kids, and right now, that's all stress. Those jobs and work is being canceled and so forth. And so, whenever you have stress moments, and then beyond COVID-19, like this stuff, stress happens in life, I don't care, on every end of the spectrum, from the elites to the average, age group athlete, everyone is going to deal with some kind of life stress, and it's going to interfere with training. That's just the way it goes. And so what you do in those times is you get outside and you smell the roses. That's the best thing to do. And that makes you, it does make you realize like why you got into cycling or why you got into running. And for me, I mean, it's always been the views. So, or the trees or the smell of the trees or the forest, you know, getting out at early morning. I think it was the other week, I got out on my mountain bike early morning and, you know, the sun was out and it was brisk and I'm just like, this is life and this is why I love to do this. And so that's my message. Stressing out on it. I mean, again, if you're an Olympic athlete, then sure, there's going to be a stress period and you're going to have to get over that. It is what it is. You're not going to put on the Olympics by yourself. So, you know, you need to, at some point, take a step back, refocus, and then press on.
I think that's a great point to make. I know on FitLab Pittsburgh, we do movement tip and lifestyle hacks every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And today, our actual tip, we're recording this on the 25th of March, but today our tip was, you know, make sure exercise and movement is a eustress or a good stress and not a distress or a bad stress. And I think you've just reinforced that when I was thinking about that, making the video, that, you know, that's the important thing about moving on a regular basis, because the Olympics are a goal, you know, maybe running a marathon is a goal, doing a 100-mile race or a multi-day mountain bike race. But at the end of the day, as you said, just being able to get out on the bike and spin, and maybe that bird you see or those two deer running across the road make you realize, wow, this is really cool that I'm able to do this.
Right. I mean, it is always more fun when you're more fit. And I think you'll agree upon that sometimes, like, you know, because you just, you know, and especially, and this is the bike racer mind coming out of me. It's like, you know, you're riding along, but you can do it a little bit faster and it's a little more fun. But yeah, that is all my goal. This is why I do what I do, because I'm always focused on getting people just a little bit more fit. And you feel that, you know, no matter if you're walking, hiking, running, or whatever it is, it makes you feel good. So, but yeah.
I'm curious with some of the athletes you have. I know from having worked with runners and bikers, there are some people who they're the solo guys or ladies, or they have one or two people that they always go out on their rides or runs with. And then there's other people who, you know, they just have a difficult time functioning unless they're in a group ride or running with a group of people. Have you had conversations with any of your athletes about this, either ones who always are alone or ones that you know are more prone? And I don't mean that in a bad way, but they're more likely to exercise in large groups of people. And maybe right now that isn't the smartest thing to do.
Yeah. The majority of people that I have are solo riders or runners. There's a few guys, like one guy up in Michigan who leads a weekly group ride and on Mondays, and that was just canceled. So, you know, the advice is just pick one or two people and make sure that, you know, you guys are social distancing and go ride. I can't see an issue with that. But on the flip side of it, got a guy out of, I think the Boston area. He's really intense. This guy's a scientist and he's got that mind, right? He just, he actually is in his glory right now because he's always training alone. And now there's no cars on the road. So, you know, there's fewer people out around where he lives, and, you know, he's got it all to himself. So he's like loving it. Yeah, so it's interesting. My main is everyone should be, and the first thing you're taught, like as a trainer or as a coach, is personal safety. Like you're always looking out for people's safety first. That's the number one role. Then, you know, exercise is second. So when it comes to this COVID-19, the scary thing is, with any endurance athlete, respiratory infections are common. And so, especially when you're pushing it and pushing it, pushing it and pushing it, pushing it, you're susceptible for an upper respiratory infection. And so, since this COVID-19 attacks the lung, that's my main concern with the people who like to push it. So I'm trying to send that message and say, you know, solo rides, don't be wasting yourself or pushing it too hard, because there is a point to where there's too much exercise, right? So
I know one of the great things about running, hiking, and even biking is it's pretty easy to do. As far as, you know, with biking, you need a helmet, a bike, and maybe a pair of shoes if you get more advanced. So, and we also were talking a little bit that, you know, you've been doing this sort of thing online. since 2007, 2008. I know just in the fitness world as a whole, I guess in the Pittsburgh area, it was middle to late of last week where most of the fitness facilities said, okay, we're closing down, or we're going to do streaming things, or we're going to train people over the internet. And I just, from following around and watching on social media, there are a fair number of people who this is completely novel to them. And I suspect what we'll find is there's some people who are going to thrive at it. There's some people who are going to go, God, I can't wait till I can get back in my facility or get back to talking to people face to face without a computer screen. And then there's some people who are just going to fall by the wayside because maybe that's the best way they work. For somebody who's worked in this virtual environment for over 10 years, what are some things that you could offer to other fitness professionals to keep in mind? I mean, obviously, we're not asking you to give away your secret stories or your coaching or your secret sauces, but there are some tips that everybody, whether they're a cycling coach, a personal trainer, or even a physical therapist who's all of a sudden doing telemedicine, can benefit from somebody like you who's been in the field in this realm for the last 10 plus years.
The number one thing is that, there are plenty of online services now. I use Training Peaks. I have since the beginning. I think they're great at it. There are plenty of online platforms where you can post a schedule online for your clients to follow. My number one tip is that you can't rely just on that online schedule. You have to have human interaction with people. And so no matter what, text messages, phone calls, if you're local, meet up and shake hands and do a workout every once in a while, that combined with the online presence is the recipe for success in this field. Depending on how busy you are, what you got going on will depend on how much communication you can give. You also need to get to know the people that you're working with, get to know your clients and how much communication they like. And, I have some people very few people call me, but some people call me, we talk it out. I have some on Facebook Messenger who like to send Facebook Messenger. I have others who like to send text messages. And so you figure that out, and however your clients like to communicate, you communicate that way with them and consistently. When you combine that and you get to know people, that's the other part of it. You combine that with an online presence and you make the online presence realistic each week for these people, then you have a recipe for success for coaching someone online.
I think that's some great info. I know that you mentioned Strava and Training Peaks, and I know one of the really cool things for me is when I travel and I do a workout and then I pull it up on my Strava and I realize that there are various segments that other people have done. Do you think that is going to have something in the future, whether it's Strava or something else? And I know that there are electric trainers or indoor trainers where you can compete against other people. Do you think there's going to be a pop-up of events or races, maybe people doing certain segment lengths or racing electronically, that's going to have an increased factor on people who are missing out on their events?
You know what? It's funny you say that because there's a local group that just popped up and they invited me, and they're doing exactly that. They're going to start tracking, local Strava segments in time, and they're going to choose a segment each week, and they're going to say, hey, the segment this week is this hill over in this township. Whoever gets the fastest time is the winner of the weekly race on Strava. And I actually thought that was kind of cool. It's motivating, right? Indoors we have Zwift, and there are lots of competitions on Zwift, and lots of people. But I can't see, people like to ride outside or run outside. And, but I could see some maybe competitions, for Strava popping up. Although once things settle down and events come back, people are focused on events and experiences, and that's kind of been driving the industry for a long time. So I think that will always, take the top spot.
I think what's interesting, I believe I read a couple of weeks ago that the Ironman Corporation is going to hold virtual Ironman competitions online. And this was before COVID-19. And just I think they're only doing half Ironman distance, but just the idea of, biking 56 miles on the bike and running on a treadmill for half a marathon just strikes me as something that I almost think that I'd rather do a 100-mile ride outside with absolutely no food and water.
Yeah, it's really hard indoors. And, I see some of the best guys out there, on average. I mean, I've seen some 5-hour rides on a trainer. That's a long time. I see a lot of really good guys can play like 2.5, 3-hour days in on a trainer. That's also a really long time. But outside of that, 60 to 90 minutes is pretty much what most people can stand. That, and there's a whole nother subject there, because with a trainer, it's not completely different than outside, but you're doing less movement when you're on an indoor trainer, and so you're targeting your prime movers more than you would when you're outside. So it trains you slightly differently. So if you're not adjusted to that, lower back pain is a common problem when people go indoors to start training, because they tighten their quads, tighten hip flexors, rotate that pelvic girdle, and you got lower back pain. So we get them to stretch that stuff out, and it usually cures it. But yeah, long rides on a trainer, it's just not fun, no matter how you put it.
We're talking with Mike Schultz of Highland Training. He is a endurance coach and strength coach who works with people both virtually and face-to-face. I'm curious, it's probably a little soon to tell on this with where we are with COVID-19. Do you think this is going to drive, or has the potential to drive, more people to maybe run outside more, cycle outside more, hike outside, and potentially take on a coach because they realize, wow, this outdoor stuff is as fun or more fun than going to a fitness facility?
I'd hope. I mean, in a way, this COVID-19 thing drives people to realize that, hey, people do this virtually, and this makes sense, right? And this is motivating. That's the funniest thing, is when people sign on with me, they don't really know what to expect sometimes. And what they find is that, I'm going to email them and text them every single week, so they better get their workouts in, right? So it's a motivating experience. It's different than the gym. It's just as motivating. But yeah, I mean, there's been, especially when you're viewing things like Facebook and the ads, there's been a lot more ads popping up about virtual training now. And I think it's kind of put it in the spotlight a little bit, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
And I know you and I were chatting before we started recording. You mentioned you were out for a ride this weekend in North Park in Pittsburgh, and it was pretty busy. I know a lot of people are kind of transitioning to outdoors or going outdoors because their facilities are not open. For maybe people who are not familiar with outdoor cycling or outdoor walking and hiking because they've done most of their movement and workouts in gym facilities, as somebody who does the majority of his work outside, 2 or 3 recommendations you'd offer, either as far as behaving in a polite manner, or training tips just for people who say, I'm doing this outside at North Park, but people keep yelling at me, or they're not yelling at me, but I want to make sure I'm not doing something to embarrass myself or get hurt.
Right. I mean, the first training tip is, these go hand in hand, is to be polite. So I was outside. When we were riding on Sunday, we were kind of weaving through people. At times we were on a rail trail, and we started weaving through some people walking with their kids or strollers or whatever. And at that point, you have to realize what's going on in the world, why everyone's outside. So we tried to get off the rail trail to space it out and get out of the way. And B, we rode slow because that's polite. And that's where you kind of like put the workout down and say, I don't need to be doing 100 miles an hour through these people to get in my efforts. No one needs to be that focused. When people come, I say, as long as you're doing like 80% of the work. So like if you encounter that, then find or seek out maybe another trail that's not as busy, or another road that's not as busy, and make it work the best, right?
I think the International Mountain Biking Association had it best with their phrase, share the trail.
It's exactly it. And, whether they're a bike or a horse, especially, But whatever it is, just move aside, give each other some room, and be polite. I think if you can do those things, then everyone's going to have a good time. And it does seem like our local parks here, I think at one time there were some head-butting and, trail usage issues, but I think that's kind of all resolved. People just use the trail and have fun with it. So.
Great info from Mike Schultz of Highland Training. He's been coaching virtually and face-to-face for well over 10 years. Mike, thanks for taking a few minutes to talk to FitLab Pittsburgh and Moving to Live about movement and virtual training in this era of COVID-19.
Not a problem, man. And on that note, hope everyone stays safe and healthy, and hope everyone's able to get outside a little bit. So hopefully we get past this soon, but anytime.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of FitLabPGH, brought to you by Moving to Live. Intro and exit music is Marathon Man by Jason Shaw. Check out the show notes for contact info for our latest guests, links to other information mentioned in the episode, and links to our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise for professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Your free subscription gets you notified when we release a new episode. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email us at fitlabpgh@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at fitlabpgh and like us on Facebook. If you enjoy our podcasts, please tell your friends about us and consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Make FitLabPGH a go-to place to learn more about movement in the Pittsburgh area. Until next time, keep on moving.